The first thing Marin Calloway saw when she opened her cabin door that January morning was the flour sack. It sat clean against the worn planks of her porch, untouched by snow. Beside it, she counted 2 ears of dried corn, a heel of salt pork wrapped in oilcloth, and a small twist of paper that held coffee. The bag was warm. Whoever had set it down had done so only minutes before sunrise, and had walked away the way a man walks when he knows how to leave no track at all. She did not look around. Looking around was how a woman got caught, and being caught was how a person got hanged in Bitter Ridge, Colorado, in the winter of 1886. Asa Hollister had made that perfectly clear at the church meeting in November. Hang them, he had said from the pulpit. Hang them where the cottonwoods can see. She carried the sack inside, set it by her cold stove. Then she knelt and pressed her forehead to the iron door. The man who had slept beside this stove for 11 winters had promised her she would never go hungry. He had been dead for 3 winters. The promise had not. Down the slope, where the road dead-ended past Charlie Rusk's place, other doors were opening onto other porches. Other women were kneeling beside other stoves. And not one of them was asking who. They were all of them asking how. Because nobody had ever once caught him. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight. Let us know down in the comments where you are listening from. We love knowing who is sitting with us when a story begins. The town of Bitter Ridge sat in a notch of the San Juans where the snow piled 10 feet deep in December and did not let go until the aspens budded in May. It was a company town then, the way most company towns were. Every shingle on the main drag belonged to the Mercantile National Bank of Durango, and every mortgage note on the shingle was signed in tidy copperplate by Asa Hollister. The ore went down the mountain in his wagons. The lumber came up the mountain in his wagons. The food that kept a body alive through a Colorado winter passed across his counters at the price he chose to charge that week, and it was always a price that left something owed. 3 winters back, in the spring of '83, a young homesteader named Sam Calloway had ridden down from a high pasture to demand an accounting. He had the deed in his pocket and the names of 6 neighbors whose water rights had been quietly sold out from under them. He had word that Hollister was padding the new barbed wire fence by 2 miles into the public range, and he was prepared to ride all the way to Denver if he had to. He was 28 years old. He had a wife of 7 years and a brother nobody in town had seen in a long time. He never reached Denver. His horse came back without him, the saddle empty, the cinch unbuckled. The sheriff wrote it up as a riding accident on a slick trail. The widow took the body home in the back of a neighbor's wagon and buried him under the big cottonwood at the bottom of the pasture. Marin Calloway was 25 years old. She had never been afraid of a Colorado night before. She was afraid of them now. What she had not been afraid of, and what she would soon learn she should have been, was the quiet man who sometimes came down out of the high country in the deep of a winter night. Before she knew anything for certain, she knew the shape of him in the dark. She knew he walked the way her husband had walked when he was trying not to wake a sleeping baby. She knew he set the packages down gently, as if he were afraid the wood of the porch would bruise. And she knew that he had to be carrying every one of those sacks up a mountain trail by lantern light through snow that would have killed a lesser man. She did not say any of this to anyone. Not to Charlie Rusk. Not to the widow Penner, who had 3 small children and no husband at all after the diphtheria took him. Not to Sheriff Branham, a quiet man with a quiet limp who nobody in town had ever seen take off his coat. What she said, when Asa Hollister raised his reward to $500 for the capture of the night rider, was nothing. She sewed. She did laundry. She folded cotton into neat stacks and pretended she had not heard the offer of blood money issued from a church pulpit in front of God and the whole town. The reward did what rewards always did in Bitter Ridge. It turned the kind of love a body had kept private into the kind of suspicion a body could spend. Men began watching the roads at night. Boys were posted at the creek crossings with lanterns. Dogs were tied out to bark when they heard a footfall. And every morning, the sacks still appeared, untouched, on porches that had been watched all the night through. It was in February that a new widow arrived in Bitter Ridge. Her name was Ruth Penner, and she was not the same Penner as the one who had died of diphtheria, although they had been married to brothers. She came down out of the high pasture with 3 children, the smallest still at the breast, and a canvas bag with everything she owned inside it. She came to Marin because Marin was the only woman in town whose hand she trusted. I think about her sometimes still, the way she stood in Marin's doorway with snow in her hair and a look on her face that asked permission before her mouth did. Marin took her hands and pulled her inside. The look on Ruth's face was the look of a woman who had heard there might be a place in the world where she was safe. She had not been wrong. Ruth settled into the second cabin down the slope, the one with the crooked chimney, and by the second night the children's crying had stopped and Ruth's hands were steady enough to knead bread. Marin had not told her about the sacks. She had not told her where they came from or who left them. But on the third morning, when Ruth opened her own door and found a small bundle of dried apples, a measure of beans, and a folded paper with no writing on it, she carried the package to Marin with the look on her face that a woman has when she has been given a thing she cannot repay. Marin took the folded paper. She opened it. The paper was empty. She turned it over. There was a single drawn line at the bottom, in the shape of a small bird. She closed the paper. She put it back in Ruth's hand. "You keep that for the children," she told her. Ruth turned it over once more. Then she did as she was told. All winter long, Marin had been leaving signs. A folded scrap of cloth on a particular fence post. A certain knot tied a certain way to the handle of a watering trough. A small pile of stones under a specific bridge where the road turned toward the high pasture. She had not known, until she had done it, that she knew how. The reason she knew, she realized one March night when the snow had stopped falling and the moon was high enough to keep a body honest, was that Sam had taught her. Sam had taught her everything about the country, the trails, the names of the trees, the way the wind moved through a notch in a certain way that meant the storm would turn. And Sam had learned it all from the brother he never talked about, the brother he had gone to find 3 times before the summer he died, the brother who was supposed to be in Montana or California or any of a dozen other wide places he had left behind. The brother whose name, if you asked in Bitter Ridge, nobody could remember anymore. It was a name Marin had not spoken aloud in 3 years. She was not going to speak it now. What would you have done in her place? Would you have shared what you suspected, or kept it close to your chest, knowing that a single word in the wrong ear could end a life? She kept it close, and she went on doing what a woman in her place could do. She carried water. She chopped wood. She knelt beside stoves and did not look around. And on the nights when the moon was dark and the wind was up, she set a small lamp in her window and let it burn until dawn. The lamp was not a signal. The light from that lamp traveled exactly the length of her own property and no further. It was the kind of light a person left burning for a man who was coming home from a long absence, the way a person had always done, since the first lamp had ever been lit, since the first lamp had ever been left on for a man who might never come. But Asa Hollister had eyes in places a body did not think to look. He had a man named Creel who had been a cavalry scout before the wars, and he had put Creel up on the ridge above Marin's cabin in the 3rd week of March, with a glass, and in order to find the rider if it cost him his own skin. What Creel found, on the night of the 23rd, was a figure on the lower trail, moving toward town with an empty pack. The figure walked with the gait of a man who knew every rut of that trail, who placed his feet where the snow was softest, who paused at the creek crossing just long enough to drink before crossing, who moved under the cottonwoods at the far edge of the pasture at exactly the moment the moon slipped behind a cloud. Creel watched the whole of it. He had not seen a face, but he had seen enough. He brought his report to Hollister the next morning. That afternoon, Hollister gathered 6 men and rode up to the high pasture with rifles and a warrant and a satisfaction on his face that was not the kind of face a man wears when he is bringing something to justice. It was the kind of face a man wears when he is finishing a thing he started 3 winters ago. Marin heard the hooves from her kitchen. She did not hesitate. She put on her coat. She took the small tin of lard from the shelf, the one she had been saving for a sewing project she had not gotten around to, and she walked out into the yard. Ruth Penner came running down the slope from the cabin below, one of the children on her hip, and Marin handed her the tin without a word. "For the dog," she said. "She will need it tonight." Then she walked up the road toward the hills. She did not know what she was going to do. She only knew that the storm had arrived. The high pasture was 3 miles up the mountain, and the snow was knee-deep, and the afternoon was falling fast. Marin was a small woman. She was not a fast woman. She was not a woman who could catch a man on horseback or outrun a man with a rifle. She knew this about herself. She had always known it about herself. She climbed anyway. She climbed because the man on the trail was her husband's brother. She climbed because he had been feeding her and her neighbors through a winter that would have killed them. She climbed because the lantern in her window had not been for nothing. She climbed because a woman did not have to be fast in this country to be useful. She had only to be certain. She met him on the trail at the top of the first switchback. He was on a black horse, the saddle cinched tight, the empty pack folded and stowed. He had heard them coming, of course. He had been listening since dawn. He turned the horse toward her, and she saw his face for the first time in 3 years, and the face was older than it should have been, and thinner, and there was a scar she had never seen before above his left eyebrow. "Josiah," she said. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Get off the trail, Marin." "I climbed 3 miles," she said. "Then you should not have." She took a step forward. He did not move the horse. She saw the rifle across his saddle, and she saw the line of his jaw, and she knew what he was going to do. He was going to ride away. He was going to disappear back up into the mountains the way he had disappeared 3 winters ago, the way he had been planning to disappear all along. He had been leaving food on porches because he could not stop. He had been hiding in the hills because he could not stop hiding either. "You cannot leave tonight," she said. "They have a scout on the ridge above the second draw. They have a man named Creel, and Creel sees in the dark the way other men see in daylight. They will meet you on the trail past the cottonwoods in less than an hour." He looked at her. Then he looked up at the ridge. "I did not come up here to be saved by a woman," he said. She did not flinch. "That is not why I came up here," she said. "I came up here because the lamp in my window was not for nothing, and you owe it to the man who taught you everything. I was going to walk 3 miles up a mountain to keep you from dying on a piece of ground that would never be marked with your name." He was quiet for a long time. Then he swung down off the horse. He stood in the snow with his rifle in his hand and his empty pack on his shoulder and the blood coming back into his face from the cold, and he looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. He believed her. He unbuckled the saddle. He handed her the horse. "Take her down to Charlie Rusk's barn. Hide her in the second stall under the hay. Tell Charlie I will come for her when the men have gone." She took the reins. He took the pack. "If I am not back by morning," he said, "do not come looking." She looked at him. "Josiah Calloway," she said, "a body is supposed to come home. That is the whole point of the lamps." He did not answer. There was nothing to add to that. He went up the trail. She went down it. The snow fell between them. She made it back to the second draw just before the moon rose. She saw the 6 riders on the trail above the upper pasture, lanterns swinging, rifles ready. She saw them ride past the place where Josiah should have been, and she saw them stop and confer, and she saw them ride on. They had missed him. He had gone to ground in a place she had not known about, a place he had been keeping hidden for 3 winters, a shed half buried in snow against the face of the cliff above the second canyon. She went home. She did not light the lamp that night. She did not need to. If this story is moving you, you are exactly who we wrote it for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep bringing them to you. In the morning, Josiah came down out of the hills on foot, his rifle empty, his beard frosted white. He came to her door at dawn, and she let him in, and she set out what was left of the food he had carried her through the winter, and they sat at her kitchen table and ate the first real meal he had eaten in 3 years. He told her everything. He had not gone to Montana. He had not gone to California. He had come back, the night his brother died, and he had ridden to the high pasture and found the cabin his brother had built, and he had lived in it alone, and he had broken ground the next spring and planted. He had grown corn. He had grown beans. He had grown squash. He had dried it and salted it and stored it under the snow in a cache his brother had taught him to dig, the cache the 2 of them had dug together when they were boys, in the shape of a small bird, on a piece of folded paper. He had heard, the next winter, about the way Hollister was gouging the town out of its food, and he had gone down the mountain with the first sack in the dark of a December morning, and he had set it on the porch of the widow his brother had loved. And he had not been able to stop. Every family that had been hurt by Asa Hollister received a sack. Every widow that had lost a man in the wars Hollister had waged against the small ranchers. Every child that had gone hungry through a winter because the price of flour had been raised every week in November. He had carried every one of those sacks down the mountain in the dark and walked back up by dawn and gone back to his cabin to begin again. "I cannot stop," he told her. "I cannot stop. If I stop, the children will not eat." She had known this about him. She had known it since the first morning she had knelt beside her stove and pressed her forehead to the iron. She had known it the way a person knows a truth about someone they have loved a long time, that there are some kinds of goodness in a man that cannot be cured. She had been saving a thing she had not known she was saving. She reached under the loose board in the corner of her kitchen and brought out a small wooden box. She opened it. Inside was a folded paper with a small drawn bird at the bottom. "Sam's last letter," she said. Josiah looked at it. "He taught me to draw that," Josiah said. "I know," she said. "He taught me to think in it." They were quiet for a long time. The lamp burned low. The kitchen smelled of coffee. "You do not have to carry this alone anymore," she said. He did not answer her right away. "A body is supposed to come home," he said finally. "That is the thing I was not brave enough to do." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his palm up under hers. "Then come home," she said. He closed his hand around hers. The reckoning came 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday in early April, in the wooden courthouse at the heart of Bitter Ridge. Sheriff Branham called it. It was the first time anyone in town had ever seen Sheriff Branham do anything louder than lift a glass of water. He stood at the front of the room, straight-backed, his coat off for the first time in living memory, and he read out the names of 17 families he had personally watched receive sacks from the writer, of 4 wives whose husbands Hollister had put into the ground by one fraudulent means or another, of 3 children that had been born in the bitter part of the winter and had lived because a stranger had left grain on a porch. He read out a list of Harriman mercantile receipts, all signed in Hollister's name, all recording the sale of a homestead's worth of feed at 4 times the going rate. He read out the surveyor's measurements for the new barbed wire fence, which had been moved an exact 2 miles and 300 yards onto the public range, just as Sam Calloway had tried to tell people it had been in the spring of '83. He laid out the whole of the long, quiet cruelty of Asa Hollister in a voice that did not rise once. Hollister's own man Creel was called to the stand. He had kept a record, he said. He had written down the dates on which he had set out sacks, disguised as the writer, in order to frame certain of his rivals in town. He had been instructed to do so by Hollister himself. He had the letters. Hollister stood up in the gallery. He said nothing. He was 47 years old. He was one of the richest men in the San Juans. He had not been embarrassed in 20 years. Marin stood up in the back of the room. The wooden box was under her arm. She opened it. She lifted out the folded paper. She read it aloud, in a voice that did not shake. Sam's last letter to his brother, written the week before he died, asking him to come home, to come and live on the high pasture, to come and be a neighbor to the people of this valley, to come and not be afraid. Then she called Josiah's name. He came down the aisle from the back of the room. He was wearing his brother's coat. He was carrying the folded paper with the small drawn bird. He stood in front of the bench. "I am the man you have been hunting," he said. "I am Josiah Calloway. I am Sam Calloway's brother. I have lived on the high pasture for 3 winters, and I have fed every family in this valley that you tried to starve out, and I would do it again and again and again, until there was no longer a hungry child in the San Juans." The room was quiet for a long time. Then Asa Hollister said something that nobody in town had ever heard him say. He asked to be seated. He sat down. He was removed from the courthouse an hour later and lodged in the county jail at the foot of the valley. The Mercantile National Bank of Durango went into receivership by the end of the month. The barbed wire fence was taken down by neighbors who had not spoken to each other in years. The flour on the shelves of the store was, for the first time in living memory, sold at a price a body could afford. Josiah came down from the high pasture in May and moved into his brother's cabin. He planted the front garden with what Marin brought him in a jar from town, and Ruth Penner's children helped him with the rows, and Charlie Rusk brought the horse down from the second stall of his barn, and the county surveyor marked the cabin's deed in the name of both Calloway brothers, so that neither of them could ever be moved off that ground again. Marin married Josiah on a clear day in June, under the big cottonwood at the bottom of the pasture, with the whole of the squatter line standing in the yard. Ruth Penner sang, badly and without apology. Sheriff Branham presided, and he took his coat off for the second time in living memory and laid it across the back of a chair, and the sun came down through the cottonwood leaves in pieces of warm gold that lay on the bride's hair like a second veil. The lamp in Marin's kitchen window was lit every night from then on, not as a signal, not to guide a man home from the hills, as a promise a body could keep to itself, that the home was there, and the man was in it, and the night was good. The last photograph anyone ever took of Josiah was taken 28 years later, on a porch in Bitter Ridge, in the long light of an October afternoon. He is sitting in a chair that his brother built. A young woman, his grandniece, is braiding a wreath of late-blooming chamisa for the fence post. There is a bowl of corn on the table beside him, and a coffee cup, and a folded paper with no writing on it. Only a small drawn bird at the bottom. He is not looking at the camera. He is looking at the porch. He is looking at the place where, once, in another year, a sack of warm flour had been set down, and a man who had not been able to stop had walked back up into the hills. He had come home. That was the whole of it. That was the whole point of the lamps. Next time, we will tell the story of a deaf woman who was sent to work on a cattle ranch in the New Mexico Badlands because her family believed she was a burden and a shame, and the heavy, gentle, half-mute foreman who could hear every single thing her silence was trying to say. Subscribe if you want to be there for it.